Welcome, all my fellow Washington brethren and sistren. I am your man and resident Washington football team fan, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on the Washington Football Report. So, normally I just wait till Thursday when we get up live with one another and discuss all of these topics, but I felt like there were so many different things transpiring that had impact on Washington potentially that I wanted to address this in advance, and maybe this will lead to further discussion on Thursday night. So, three items that I want to tackle on today's show quickly. One, I know you guys heard about the massive trade with the Panthers and Jets, including Sam Darnold. Darnold going from New York Jets to the Carolina Panthers in exchange for 3 draft picks, a 6th this year, a 2nd, and a 4th in next year's draft. And so that's something that intrigued me from this standpoint. Washington could have done the same thing if they were really, truly interested. And the Jets themselves were interested at the time when Washington was interested. That's something that some of you haven't considered. When Washington was ready to act on a potential Sam Darnold trade, maybe the Jets weren't ready to make a move yet. And I talked about this on the podcast yesterday, that I think the Jets, when Washington was interested, when they called up the Jets and inquired about Sam Darnold, I think the Jets at that time weren't looking to move Darnold unless they were going to get a 1. They were trying to extract value, and I talked about that yesterday, and Washington didn't have time to wait. Their timeline and the Jets' timeline are two totally different things. The Jets can wait as long as they want on this because guess what? They're getting a quarterback at 2. No matter what happens, they're going to have their quarterback. They're going to be fine. So they weren't pressed to make a move. They didn't have to do anything until they felt like it was the right time for them. They were moving on their own timetable. For Washington, they had to have this done prior to free agency getting underway because once free agency took off, these quarterbacks, as we saw, they're going to go quick. All right. If you wait too long, Andy Dalton's gone. Ryan Fitzpatrick's gone. Cam Newton's already gone back to the Patriots. And so you didn't want to be out here naked with just Taylor Heineke and Kyle Allen coming back. You didn't want to go back down the Alex Smith road. You had already gone down that path. Didn't want to go back down that road again. Jacoby Brissett was off to Miami. Tyrod Taylor off to Houston. There weren't many options available, so you had to act fast. Already going into free agency, the pick of the litter wasn't all that great to begin with. You just heard the names I ran off. Andy Dalton, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Jacoby Brissett, and Tyrod Taylor. These names don't get anybody excited. We know what they are as quarterbacks at this point of their careers. Jameis Winston, in all likelihood, was going back to New Orleans. He was one of the few names that did actually pique interest of a lot of people during free agency. And so you had to act quickly if you were Washington. You didn't have time to wait on the Jets to decide what they wanted to do. And the Jets were looking to get a 1 from someone. The longer they drew this thing out, maybe someone would get desperate and maybe a 1 would come calling. It didn't. They ultimately settled on 3 picks. I thought they got good value for Sam Darnold because I honestly thought he was only worth a 2, maybe a 2 and a 6. That extra 4th would have been a deal breaker for me. So I thought they actually made out pretty well. Considering all of the circumstances. And everyone knew in the league that they weren't going to keep Sam Darnold on their roster. There was no way that made any sense for them. So if you're Washington, could you have made this deal? Sure, you could have made this deal a month ago. You couldn't have made this deal on April 5th because you couldn't sit and wait for all these quarterbacks to find new homes and then be desperate. And then the Jets could take advantage of you being desperate and maybe extract more than what they ultimately got for Sam Darnold. So I think Washington did what they had to do, and I think they did the smart thing by just getting a quarterback, putting them in a position where they weren't going to be desperate. So I don't think Washington was wrong in not making this deal. If this deal were on the table a month ago, I would say Washington should have been very interested in potentially making this deal. Again, that 4th round pick in next year's draft might have been a deal breaker for me. The 6 this year, the 2 next year, I would have been willing to give that up. Seriously, I would have been willing to give that up. The 4 is the one that I would have been looking at and saying, hey, I don't know. But again, a 23-year-old quarterback with the chance to figure out if he's the franchise guy or not, a 2, a 4, and a 6, really not that big of a price to pay, honestly speaking. If Sam Darnold turns out to be what everyone thought he was going to be coming out of USC, and the Panthers now have their future signal caller for the next decade plus, a 2, 4, and a 6, it's peanuts compared to what they've just solved, which is what we're looking to solve and have been looking to solve for the last 30 years. So you understand where I'm coming from there. Another side note and a ripple effect from that trade is now that Sam Darnold is in Carolina is that Teddy Bridgewater is now potentially available. And for some reason, I don't know why, then this is asinine to me, that somehow we got dragged into the conversation that we need to call up Carolina and see what it's going to take to get Teddy Bridgewater. That just doesn't make any sense from any perspective. And I can't understand why anyone would think that makes any sense. And I'm listening. I've always got an open ear, but I just don't understand why you would think adding Black Alex Smith. So we just got rid of Alex Smith, and you want to add the same guy, but just a different a skin color, okay? Just melatonin in his skin, and you want to add the same guy, not to mention you've already brought on Ryan Fitzpatrick, and you've got Taylor Heineke and Kyle Allen already on the roster. Like, where's the psychological sense in that? If you think that makes any kind of sense, you need to wash your face and get your mind right. So there's nothing here for Washington out of this entire mix. Teddy Bridgewater isn't coming to Washington, nor should Washington even be interested in calling up Carolina to see what it would take. Why? Again, that's a road that leads to nowhere, just like Ryan Fitzpatrick is a road that leads to nowhere, which is why I was interested in a guy like Sam Darnold. You know how I viewed this offseason in the quarterback position, and I talked about 2 types of quarterbacks that I was willing to go out there and get. You either had to be an established veteran that was a clear upgrade over what we had and that you could go with for the next 3 to 5 years, or it needed to be a young guy with tremendous upside that if he turned out to be a guy that we could move forward with, you've got a quarterback that potentially could be your signal caller for the next decade. That's what I was looking to acquire this offseason. We didn't acquire either of those things. We got a stopgap in Ryan Fitzpatrick. We're going to move forward with that guy. That leads me right into the next category and thing I wanted to talk about on today's show. And that was the report that the Falcons and Panthers both are interested in moving out of their respective spots in the draft if the right price is laid out for them. Falcons are at number 4. The Lions are at number 7. So if you're one of those people that still want to attack the quarterback position aggressively and you want to go and get a guy in this year's draft, those may be your avenues to which to do it. Now, let me just say this first. You don't make a trade now if you're Washington. You don't make a trade because we don't know what San Francisco is going to do. And in waiting, you may ultimately find yourself on the outside looking in if you're really interested in going up to get a quarterback. You have to know what you're getting. You know, we're getting to the point now where you're at number 4 and we're assuming 3 quarterbacks. And this is a really, really safe assumption to make at this point, that the first 3 picks in this upcoming year's draft are going to be quarterbacks. So you're at now a point at 4 with Atlanta where you're getting the 4th quarterback taken off the board. Now, what guy is that going to be is instrumental to any deal being consummated, okay? Because, again, the wild card is number 3, San Francisco at 3. If Mac Jones is the selection, that leaves Justin Fields and Trey Lance available at 4. That's when I believe the pick becomes really relevant and the Falcons now are sitting on a gold mine at 4. Because then I think teams would be interested in coming up to get Justin Fields or Trey Lance. If the selection is Justin Fields at 3 or Trey Lance at 3, even if it's Lance, I still think you may get some teams interested to come up and get Justin Fields. I think he's the guy that everyone would be interested in coming up for. If that pick is Justin Fields at 3, however, and you trade up to 4 and Fields was your guy, you're screwed. So you can't go up to 4 right now. And there may be a team that says, you know what? I really don't give a shit. I don't care if it's Fields, Lance, or Jones. I want one of them, and I'm willing to come up to 4 to get one of them. If that's what floats your boat, go right ahead. But that can't be what Washington is thinking. They've got to have a guy in mind. We've heard that guy potentially is Justin Fields. Well, you can't trade up to 4 blindly and assume that the 49ers are going to take Mac Jones. Even if you heard that through the grapevine, you can't be assured that that's what they're going to do. You have to wait. So it's interesting to see what happens at 4 with Atlanta. I've done that on the podcast. I put out a short. If you want to watch that, it's a very intriguing situation. As a Washington fan, that's something you should be monitoring because this offseason has been crazy. We don't know what Ron Rivera and company think about this crop of quarterbacks. And if they truly do love Justin Fields, and if he were to come available at 4 or possibly even 7, which I think is at this point less likely than it was a month ago. But if he were to come available at 7, because what we can now say with 100% certainty, okay, that's not a good number. What we can now say with about 98% certainty, okay, got to leave a little room for something wild to happen because so many crazy things have already transpired. But we can say with pretty much certainty at this point that we can already address the first 6 picks and say that at least 3 quarterbacks are being selected in the first 3 picks. We know 5 and 6 are going to either be wide receiver or tackles, more likely than not. Maybe, just maybe, it's an outside chance one of those 6 could be a linebacker, but more likely than not, both of those teams are taking either a receiver or a tackle, both 5 and 6. Dolphins came up to 6. They're not going to trade that pick when they came back up to 6. They've got a guy in mind that they're going to take, 1 or 2 guys that they're going to take, and that guy's going to be available. One of the 2 guys that they've come up to get is going to be available at 6. Same thing with the Bengals at 5. They've got a guy in mind, and knowing that 3 quarterbacks are coming off the board at 1, 2, and 3, even if something crazy happens at 4, it's not going to impact the Bengals. They know what they want, and they know what they're going to get at 5. Okay? So bottom line is you get to 7, and there could be a chance that if Mac Jones goes 3rd and somebody comes up, or Atlanta decides to stand pat and take a quarterback, or if somebody comes up and takes a quarterback, and more likely than not, if Mac Jones goes 3rd, Atlanta's going to trade out of 4 because somebody's going to want to come up and take Justin Fields. What if Washington really loves Trey Lance? He'll be there at 7 for Detroit. You could trade up to 7 and go get him. I'm just saying the possibilities are endless. I know a lot of you want to trade up to get Kyle Pitts, or you want to trade up to get Michael Parsons. They're not trading up for anything other than a quarterback. Trust me when I tell you this. Now, I shouldn't say they're not trading up for anything other than a quarterback. They may trade up to get a Kyle Pitts or a Michael Parsons. Those guys have to fall to them, though. Those guys have to be 3 or 4 picks away from them. They're not trading into the top 10 for one of those guys. Those guys have to be falling, and trust me, those guys aren't going to fall. But those guys have to be falling, and they have to be around 14 or 15, right in Washington's wheelhouse for them to say, okay, we can go up a few picks. We can go up 4 or 5 picks to go get this guy. They're not going all the way into the top 10 and what it's going to cost to come from 19. You're asking a team to move out of the top 10 all the way back to 19. You're going to have to pay for that. And Washington's not looking to do that unless it's a quarterback. So I just don't see Washington doing this. And let me reiterate this. I said this on the podcast yesterday. I'm going to say it again in case you didn't watch the podcast. I don't see Washington drafting a quarterback unless it's in the first round. They're not looking for a project. They're not looking for a 3rd or 4th round guy to develop. Okay? They're not going down that road again. Either they're getting a guy in the first round or they're not getting a quarterback at all. That's the way I view this. It's one of 2 scenarios for Washington, because you're not looking to have a guy eating up a roster spot that you can't cut and stash away on the practice squad. You're not looking to have that guy eat up a roster spot when you've already got 3 veterans already on your football team. And again, it's not like you can't cut Kyle Allen or Taylor Heineke. Both of those contracts are cuttable, especially Kyle Allen's contract. Taylor Heineke as well. However, why? Why put yourself in that position? So I just don't see Washington being that aggressive at quarterback after signing Ryan Fitzpatrick. just don't see them really being that thirsty for a quarterback. If a guy falls into their lap, or they love a guy that much and he's available and they have a chance to go and get him, maybe they do that. But it'll be in the first round. It won't be a second or third round selection at the quarterback position. Just don't see Washington investing anything in terms of draft capital or resources into a quarterback that's not a first round pick. Especially when you know that guy more likely than not isn't playing in his rookie season, or at least that's the way you would plan it out, that Ryan Fitzpatrick would be the stopgap this year. That guy wouldn't see the field, and you would want to have 4 years remaining of team control if you pick up the fifth-year option of that quarterback, because, again, that's when your window is the greatest. When you have a quarterback on a rookie contract, that's when your window of opportunity is its greatest. So if it's not a first-round quarterback, I just don't see Washington investing in one. But let's get to the main topic of discussion and why I wanted to come on live with you guys, or come on with you guys today and do a video. Brandon Scherff. So let me make my stance clear once again, and then we'll talk about this situation, because reports have come out that Scherff turned down a deal to become the highest paid guard in all of football. We don't know the ramifications of this deal. You cannot just jump to conclusions when you hear these things. I told you, I always side with players when it comes to contracts, because NFL stands for not for long. Get your bread while you can. This is the thing about this contract, and I've said this all along. Let me first say this. I didn't want them to franchise tag Brandon Scherff. If you weren't going to sign him to a long-term deal, I did not want to go down this road again. Simply put, end of discussion. That was my stance. Sign him long-term before free agency starts, or let him hit the market and see what he gets. And if he thinks he's going to get all this money, and he does, good for him. If he doesn't, your offer still stands and he can come back home. We will be waiting with open arms. That's how I felt about Brandon Scherff going into free agency. Either we strike a long-term deal before the period got underway, or you let him hit the market, and if someone wanted to grossly overpay, let them. If not, and he realized the grass wasn't as green on the other side as he thought, our deal that we put forth before free agency got underway was still on the table, and you can come back and sign it at any time, and we would love to have you back. We never wanted you to leave. That's how I felt about Brandon Scherff, but I did not want to do a second straight franchise tag, and this is the exact reason why, because he's got all the power, and I told you guys this before free agency got started, before they slapped the franchise tag on him, that they didn't need to go down this road, because we've been down this road before with Kirk Cousins. I almost came dressed in all black like the Omen. I was this close. But there are two sides to this thing, and that's why I didn't come in all black, because you could look at it from one perspective, which is we effed up. Second straight franchise tag. He's eating up $18 million of cap space that we can't use. And more likely than not, if he doesn't sign a long-term deal, he's not coming back, period, after this season, because you don't sign a guy to 2 straight franchise tags, have him play under 2 straight franchise tags, and then sign him to a long-term deal. That doesn't happen, and you're not going to tag him a third time. So for all intents and purposes, this is his last year in Washington if a deal doesn't get done by July 15th. That's dumb to me. That's dumb. $32 million over 2 years when you could have signed him to a long-term deal. That's stupid to me. Doesn't make any sense. However, that's one perspective. We effed up. If you can't get the long-term deal done, you messed up. The other perspective is maybe this is in the best interest of Washington that he turned down this deal. Because as we know, and as fans, we've acknowledged this, and some of us, myself included, I can't run away from this. We've tried to run away from the fact that Brandon Scherff has not been healthy. He hasn't played in 16 games in 3 straight years. It is a known fact that this guy is injury prone. As we sit here on April 6th, this guy has been injury prone, and we know it. He's a big fixture in the locker room. He's a team captain, one of the longest tenured Washington football team members. There are a lot of good things that come with Brandon Scherff. He just made his first All-Pro of his career, the first All-Pro for this franchise since the 90s. There's a lot of good that comes with Brandon Scherff. However, he's a guard, as a wise man once said. He's a guard, okay? And having a guard making the most money on your football team isn't optimal. Okay? It's not the thing you want to be doing. It's not good business. So, long-term deal or not, I don't like that he's on the franchise tag, eating up $18 million of cap, but maybe it's in the best interest of the team, because if you sign him to a long-term deal and the injury concerns continue to persist, you would have wasted money that you cannot get out of. We may be in the last year of the Brandon Scherff business. And they may have wanted him back. Obviously, they wanted him back and they thought they could get a long-term deal done, which is why they franchise tagged him. Hearing Rivera say on his last presser that they haven't spoken to Brandon since they put the franchise tag on him says all we need to know about where they are in discussions right now. It's not going well. But again, deadline spur action. Maybe he signs on the 23rd hour and we get something done. You know, but more likely than not, Brandon Scherff holds all the cards. The guy made an all-pro appearance last year. Like, his leverage in this situation is essentially what Dak Prescott had in Dallas. When Jerry Jones said, look, if I had to be taken advantage of by another human being, I would want it to be no one other than the guy sitting to my right or my left, wherever he was sitting. He was talking about Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott had the Cowboys by the balls. I told you guys that because he was on his second straight franchise tag. He did not have to sign a long-term deal unless they were his parameters, how he wanted it set up for the amount of money he wanted it to be. And he got that because he was on a second straight franchise tag. Cowboys couldn't afford to lose him. They didn't want to franchise tag him again. We're in a position that the Cowboys were in. We don't want to franchise tag him again, but we did. And he doesn't have to sign anything. He's getting $18 million this year, guys. He made $14 million last year. He's Kirk Cousining us, and we allowed it. Don't be mad at Brandon Scherff. Don't get pissed off at him. We did this. We put him in this position of power. We should have never franchise tagged him. And the fact that he's turning down money to make him the highest paid guard, you don't know how that contract was set up. You don't know the language in that contract. It could have said, hey, if you don't play in 80% of the snaps for this club, you're not going to get X a million of your dollars that's in this contract. And he probably said, I'm not signing that shit. Yeah, the numbers look great. It's going to make me the highest paid guard. But if I get injured, and you can't prevent injuries in this league. You can't predict them. You can't prevent them. Shit happens. He could go out to stab a tackle, or a defensive tackle. He could go out just to jab him, and he could tear his pec. He's done it before. And his season's done. And now a chunk of his contract or salary for that season, he's not getting it. You don't know the language in the deal, so you can't jump to conclude, well, they offered him. It's the same shit Bruce Allen tried to pull over your damn eyes before when we offered Kirk this much money and he's being greedy and you guys fell for it hook, line, and sinker. You don't know, and I get it. This is a different group. And we trust Ron, and look, Ron's playing. But we don't know the language. And I wouldn't blame them for putting language in there that says, hey, dude, we need you healthy for at least 13 games, 14 games. If you can't play in 14 games, you can't get X amount of dollars this year in incentives to get the contract to maximize. I wouldn't be mad at them for that because he hasn't been healthy the last 3 years. So I'm not upset. Some of you are irate. We need to trade Brandon Scherff. Who's going to trade for Brandon Scherff? Who's giving you anything when I know next year he's walking in free agency? Who's giving you anything for him? If I'm a team out there, I ain't giving you shit for Brandon Scherff. You know why? He'll be a free agent next year. I can sign him. Okay? If he plays well and he stays healthy, I'll be more than willing to sign Brandon Scherff to a long-term deal next year. Why would I give you anything this year and then have to turn around and sign him to a long-term deal? If you're Washington, you're stuck. He signed that franchise tag already, so you can't rescind it. And Brandon Scherff's no dummy. He signed it for a reason, because if they would have known they weren't going to be able to reach a long-term deal with him, they might have thought to themselves, maybe we need to rescind this franchise tag and free up this $18 million that's just sitting here. Well, they can't do that. They like Brandon. They want him here. I want Brandon here. But I also acknowledge that he's been injury prone. Maybe it's in our best interest that he's not here long term. We're as human beings, we're afraid of the unknown. We like being comfortable. Brandon Scherff makes us comfortable. I'm guilty. Brandon Scherff makes me comfortable. Knowing that he's our right guard makes me comfortable. It makes Morgan Moses at right tackle comfortable, knowing that he's working alongside a guy that he's been starting next to for the last 6 years. It makes everyone comfortable. Brandon Scherff on the roster makes Ron Rivera comfortable. Makes a lot of people comfortable. But maybe Brandon Scherff being on this roster long term isn't in the best interest of the Washington football team. And that's something that we need to consider. Maybe him telling us, no, I don't want to be the highest paid guard by you guys. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a blessing in disguise. I'm not saying it's, the Cincinnati Bengals turning down an offer from Washington of 2 first-round picks for Chad Johnson, saying like we just got saved from ourselves, or Washington trying to give up 3 first-rounders or 2, whatever it was, to get Jay Cutler once upon a time. I'm not saying it's that. But maybe we are dodging a bullet here. Like those other times we've dodged bullets. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. It's food for thought. So, you guys do the dishes. Leave your comments down in the comment section. How do you feel about all of the things we talked about today? Trading up for a quarterback. Waiting to see what happens and maybe Washington goes up and gets a guy. Standing pat at 19. I told you there's probably going to be some spillage, especially if Mac Jones goes third. There will be spillage in this draft. Standing pat at 19 isn't the worst thing in the world. Maybe you can even trade out of 19 if you're not satisfied with what's there. I'm pretty sure they're going to really like what's available to them at 19 if they just sit there and wait. Or, what about Brandon Scherff? How do you feel about his situation? Look, I'm indifferent at this point because they should have never have put themselves in this position. I've made my stance abundantly clear. Never wanted to be here. Never wanted to be on another franchise tag with Brandon Scherff. You had options at guard. Wes Schweitzer played his ass off last year, and Sadiq Charles could have slid in the guard. And if you had questions about him and his durability and whether he was a great fit at guard, you could have drafted another guy. We got 2 third-round picks. You got a 4th. You got ample opportunity to see what a guy like Keith Ishmael brings to the table. Like, there are options. You could have went out in free agency and got a guard. There were plenty of them on the market. You could have done something. So we'll see what happens. It doesn't seem like this is going to have a happy ending. It doesn't seem like they're going to find some kind of middle ground and a deal's going to be struck, before the July 15th deadline. I think we're going to see Brandon Scherff for 1 more year in Washington, and then he's going to move on. And honestly, 2 years, $32 million, that's a sad state of affairs if you're Washington. Shame on you. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. We can't change it now. I like Brandon Scherff. I want him on this football team. But I also don't want him being the highest paid player on this team either. So there's that as well. It's going to do it for me, your man Louie T. Remember, I am a Washington football team fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Washington spirit will never die. Washington spirit will never fold. Until we meet again, hail to our beloved Washington football team. Make sure you like this video. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Turn on your notification bell so you don't miss a thing. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to mention it again, hit the like button. I greatly appreciate you, and I'm thanking you in advance. I will see you guys on Thursday unless some other big news breaks. I'll see you on Thursday for Washington Football Report Live. Until then, I'm your man Louie T, signing off. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one. Take care.
LouieTeeNetwork.